All right. So most of you have been in this class at least once before. I certainly welcome questions, discussions, so you can keep yourself unmuted. If you are sitting next to another person and you're inclined to chat with them, or there's a lot of background noise, then please don't do that. But otherwise, that's fine. So,
Rabbi, until I ran out of charge, I was trying to tell everybody who was at your Mincha Maariv service, but of course to the class too, that the rabbi is featured in a full-page article in the Washington Jewish Week of, I don't know, but it's this week's. We put it aside to let the bugs get out of it for a few days, but it's there's a whole thing that the rabbi is featured on. It's his page. It's wonderful. Go off.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So we're looking at the question of sexual orientation and sexual identification in Jewish law. And as I said in my email this morning, I think this has broader relevance because what we see as the attitude, and I'm really speaking specifically in conservative Judaism, although I may make passing references or certainly am happy to answer questions about other branches of Judaism as well, is that our view of halakha evolves as our scientific knowledge evolves and also as societal attitudes evolve. And I will tell you that for me, this is an area where my own attitude has really evolved, okay? I mean, 2 minutes ago, I announced a change in our policy vis-a-vis whether a Zoom service is a minyan or not, and that's a change. I have to say it's not exactly a momentous change, right? I mean, nobody, I mean, I'm not saying it's minor, but it's, nobody's life or happiness hinges on that, right? Whereas the question of our attitude towards LGBT folks, that really is a question of life and death. And I will tell you that when the question of whether the conservative movement should ordain gays and lesbians was first debated in the 1990s, I was strongly on the no side, okay, including having attended conferences and signed statements and so on and so forth. And I've done a 180 on that issue, and I say that neither to pat myself on the back nor to make a Soviet-style confession of error, but simply to say that things change and people change, right? So in 2006 was when the conservative movement, or 2007 perhaps, first decided that we would ordain gays and lesbians and also consecrate same-sex commitments. And prior to that, obviously the conservative movement did not do that. Okay, so in order to be able to change that policy, and you have heard me talk about the Law Committee or the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, CJLS, the email, and many of you are on the Ritual Committee or on the Executive Committee, so you've seen the email already, but it speaks quite a bit about the CJLS. So let me just talk a little bit about what that is. It is a committee that's made up of 25 conservative rabbis, and questions of halakha which can't be resolved by the local rabbi are referred to the CJLS, right? For example, I as a local rabbi can't decide whether gays and lesbians should be ordained, right? Because I'm not a seminary. right? So the law committee has to decide that for the movement. And so responsa legal opinions are drafted, debated, revised, voted upon. And in this sense, the CJLS is like the Supreme Court of conservative Judaism, but it's unlike the Supreme Court in one way, and that is a responsum does not need a majority to be accepted. If a responsum is voted on and gains at least 6 votes, it becomes a validated opinion, and the local rabbi or the synagogue is free, or school is free to rely upon it. Okay, and thus we have validated opinions permitting and forbidding driving to synagogue on Shabbat, or eating cheese and drinking wine that don't have kosher supervision, or eating swordfish, right? And you know, people are not necessarily always on one side. I mean, I eat non-certified cheese, drink non-certified wine, drive to shul on Shabbat. I do not eat swordfish. Nor would I allow it to be served in the shul. But you know, but we are a pluralistic movement. Okay, so the law committee in 2007 had before it 3 responsa. Okay, one which said, and I have to say, and if I sound sarcastic, I don't mean to. Okay, the responsum by Rabbi Joel Roth, and you heard me mention him 3 weeks ago because Rabbi Roth is the author of the responsum, which was the basis for women being ordained as rabbis and cantors. But Rabbi Roth basically said, this is a biblical prohibition. We have no ability to override a biblical prohibition. We need to act with compassion, with sensitivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we cannot permit behavior the Bible forbids. Okay, but let me say, there are 3 assumptions, okay? And I would say this is where theology really comes in a sense, because they are assumptions really about the nature of human beings and about the nature of orientation. Okay, so all the responses say the following assumptions. As a rule, people do not choose their sexual orientation. Whether homosexual orientation is biologically or environmentally determined, most people are hardwired from childhood. It is inappropriate and harmful to ask that gays and lesbians change their orientation as if such a thing were even possible. Okay, so the conservative movement is quite clear that so-called conversion therapy is banned. Okay, it is not permitted. If you are a parent of a gay or lesbian child, it is not, I mean, not that anybody's ever asked me, but if somebody asked me, you know, may I send my kid for conversion therapy? The answer is no, you may not. It does not work, and it is cruel. Okay, and that is across the board. Okay, the second assumption is that halakha does not ban orientations or desires, right? There is no sin of being gay, okay? If you consider that, the question is not whether certain orientations are permitted or forbidden, but rather whether certain behaviors are forbidden or permitted, right? So if somebody simply says that they're gay, nobody in the conservative movement thinks that that is a sin to have a same-sex orientation or to declare, unlike, for example, the Catholic Church, okay, where depending on the particular diocese, but if you are a priest who says, I am gay, but celibate, That is to say, if I were not celibate, I would look for a partner of the same sex as myself. You can be defrocked for that. Okay. I mean, to me, it seems kind of bizarre considering that a significant percentage of Catholic priests fall under that rubric, including many of those who are doing the banning. But nevertheless, that is, again, depending on the diocese. Okay. And finally, even those who maintain that all homosexual behavior is forbidden insist that gay and lesbian Jews be made as welcome in our synagogues as anybody else. Okay. And that's really important. Okay. Because there are all kinds of things that the conservative movement, in theory, says a Jew ought not to do. Right. And if assuming for a second that I thought that that gay or lesbian sexual behavior was forbidden, right? I would be no more justified in saying people who engage in that behavior cannot receive, let's say, an aliyah, any more than I would say people who don't keep kosher can't have an aliyah, or people who don't observe Shabbos can't have an aliyah, or people who cheat on their taxes can't have an aliyah, or people who, whatever. I mean, we don't do that, right? And there is no basis for, considering that behavior, even if you think it's forbidden. There's no basis for singling out that behavior as worthy of special condemnation compared to every other behavior that people engage in. Okay, so but the responsum that says we have to maintain the ban bases itself in Leviticus 18:22. Do not lie with a man as one lies with a woman. It is an abomination. And according to Rabbi Roth, this bans all forms of homosexual activity. And because it is biblical law, we do not have the power to abrogate it. Because it represents God's will, it by definition cannot be immoral. While we should sympathize with people who have homoerotic urges, we must counsel them that it is forbidden to act on them. Those who act on them sin, but no more so than Jews who commit any behavior which is forbidden by halakha. So gays and lesbians are welcome in our congregation, but not as rabbis or cantors, any more than we would ordain as a conservative rabbi or cantor someone who ate pork, right? It therefore follows that we would not perform a same-sex commitment ceremony, again, any more than we would give kosher certification to shrimp or bacon. Okay, so this position does not hold that it's morally wrong, right? I mean, it comes really under the category of a ritual behavior, right? I mean, and certainly, I mean, if you ask me, Rabbi, is it okay for me to eat shrimp? I say, no, no, it's not okay. Well, is it morally wrong to eat shrimp? No, it's not morally wrong. It's something that Jews ought not do, right? And Rabbi Roth would put homosexual behavior in that same category, okay? Now, the responsum that's all the way on the other side says that the biblical description of something as an abomination is historically and culturally determined. Because we now know that homosexual orientation is not chosen, because mental health professionals and society at large consider it not to be a mental illness, the biblical stance is in conflict with contemporary scientific knowledge and our societal mores. The prohibition, according to this view, is null and void. Okay. So basically, the Torah is wrong, right? That's essentially what this responsum says. And in an interesting sort of legal maneuver, it passed but didn't pass, okay? Because it got the 6 votes necessary, but the committee ruled, essentially the committee ruled that it was out of order, that it was what's known as a takana, which is not an interpretation of halacha, but legislation. And that a takana needs 13 votes, not just 6, and it didn't get 13. It did get 6, but so that is not, I mean, it doesn't mean you can't agree with it, right? But it's not a validated opinion of the law committee, okay? You know, now from my position, and I have to say, I reject both of them. Okay, I mean, I'll deal with the second one first. I do not think that we as a movement can say the Bible is wrong. I just don't think we can say that, right? I mean, I think, and at the same time, I also think that we can't have a position that is unrealistic and inhumane, okay? And Rabbi Roth, I think, is really one of the finest people I know. He says that his responsum causes him tears and sleeplessness, and I believe him, but I don't believe that we can demand that people spend their entire lives without sexual intimacy. Judaism can and must demand of Jews that they channel their desires, that they restrict them when necessary, that they act on them only in ways which are Jewishly appropriate. But we have to be able to say something to people besides just no. The problem with the restrictive position is that it leaves us telling Jewish gays and lesbians not to express their sexuality at all. It therefore leaves us unable to give them any Jewish guidance about appropriate and inappropriate behavior within relationships. When they come to their rabbis for support and guidance, we can only give them guidance which we know will go unheeded. We are telling those Jewish gays and lesbians who strive for holiness, as we all should do, that the only way for them to be holy is to be celibate. In essence, ignoring Genesis teaching that it is not good for a person to be alone, right? So that's a theological statement, right? That human beings, and I'm not saying everybody, okay, but as a general rule, human beings need sexual intimacy. And to say to somebody, you must live your entire life without that because your orientation is one way rather than the other, is I think, inhumane and unrealistic. I mean, it reminds me, you know, mutatis mutandis of a conference I went when I was a Hillel director on preventing STDs among college students. And I think, yes, this was during the Reagan administration, and Nancy Reagan was famous for just say no, right? And the speaker, who was the head of student health at UVA, said, you know, just say no is fine, but it's not realistic. How about just say not without one of those, right? And and you know, and I think that is a much more realistic approach, right? So this brings us to what I would call the middle ground responsum, which argues that there's a difference between what the Torah itself bans and what later generations of rabbis have added to that ban. Leviticus 18:22 bans one specific male-to-male sexual act, while the Torah is completely silent on lesbianism, right? In other words, when the Torah says, do not lie with a male as one lies with a female, it means do not lie with a male as one lies with a female. Okay, so it is literally impossible for a female to violate that verse, right? It's impossible, right? Maybe by analogy, maybe by extension, maybe by penumbra, but not the literal meaning of the verse, right? And one of the hallmarks, and those of you who have heard me give talks before know that at least my approach to halacha is that we have the ability to distinguish between biblical law and rabbinic law, right? And we have the ability to repeal rabbinic law, okay? What one generation of rabbis has legislated, another generation of rabbis can unlegislate, okay? When there is a great societal need to do so, okay? And I don't even have to get into the question of whether previous generations of rabbis were wrong or not. It doesn't matter. Okay, the point is that everything except, in other words, the ban on male-to-male anal intercourse is biblical. Okay, everything else is rabbinic. Okay, and we have no ability to repeal that particular ban. Okay, that doesn't mean that we have to, lie under the beds of gay rabbinical students to make sure that they don't do that, right? Any more than we, lie under the beds of married rabbinic students to make sure that they observe family purity or whatever, right? But similarly, if somebody were asked me, is it okay to ignore the rule to go to the mikveh after my period? I would say, no, it's not okay. Not my job to make sure you do it, right? But since you've asked, yeah, you're supposed to. Okay, I would not even begin to hazard a guess as to what percentage of conservative Jews actually do that. All right, just as I would not begin to hazard a guess as to what percentage of conservative identified gay males refrain from anal intercourse, right? But if somebody comes to me and says, is this okay? No, it's not okay. It's not my business whether you do it or not, but since you asked, this is which, by the way, is why some gays find this response unacceptable, right? And not being a gay male, I cannot even say whether this is constitutive of somebody's identity or whatever. I don't know, okay? But like I said, so that particular act remains forbidden. But everything else essentially is repealed right now. And I have to say that this distinction between biblical and rabbinic law is not easily discarded, okay? Because if you want to tell me, I only want to follow the Bible and not the rabbis, I'm going to tell you, fine. No more Hanukkah, right? No more Hanukkah, right? No more Shabbos candles, right? I mean, there are lots of things we do that are pretty basic to our Jewish lives that are rabbinic. So we're not Karaites. We're not saying, okay, we'll get rid of everything that the rabbis did and we'll just follow the Bible. And I am not saying that, right? But I am saying that the rabbinic legislation can be repealed when necessary. Okay, and given what we know, I think it was clear that it was necessary. Okay, that the demand for lifelong celibacy is impossible and degrading. Judaism teaches us that sexuality, when appropriately expressed and channeled, is good. The companionship of loving spouses is to be desired and celebrated, and that among the highest goal of every Jew should be the creation of a family. But all of this is to be denied gays and lesbians, not as the authors have shown on the basis of biblical prohibitions, but because of rabbinic attitudes shaped by the assumption and norms of societies far different than the one in which we live. Okay, in every service where we read the Torah, we sing Darcheha Darkei Am. The Torah's paths are paths of pleasantness, right? But for gays and lesbians, they haven't been paths of pleasantness. They've been paths of bitterness on the basis of rabbinic attitudes, not on the basis of the Bible. Okay, and so so that's really, like I say, so all of those non-biblical restrictions are null and void. Now, having said that, in 2007, the law committee said, since procreation is one of the goals of marriage, obviously, if your orientation is exclusively to your own gender, what are you going to do, right? But people are bisexual, right? So in 2007, the committee said, if you're a bi woman, look for a man. If you're a bi man, look for a woman. That's what they said in 2007. And in 2007, I would have said, yeah, that's my position too. I don't think I hold that anymore. I think that people should look for a spouse who is the right spouse for them, regardless of their gender. Having said that, I think still in many ways, life is easier for straight people than gay people, at least in that particular area. But I think it's most important that you have a spouse who shares your values and with whom you're going to create a Jewish family, and that outweighs the question of the gender. Okay. And similarly, the law committee says that, same sex, or what's the opposite of same sex? Mixed sex, heterosexual, right? Couples, the values of monogamy, loyalty, faithfulness, et cetera, are important, and you should seek to create a family, and that we should have ceremonies which celebrate that. Okay, and so it is permitted, indeed encouraged, to officiate at same-sex commitment ceremonies, but they're not kiddushin. Okay, and I can't even get into that really because we don't have time, right? But kiddushin is between a Jewish man and a Jewish woman. Okay, so that a same-sex wedding will not look exactly like a straight wedding. Okay, I mean, there could be a chuppah and rings and so on and so forth, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. And as a result, okay, if a same-sex couple wants to divorce, it's not a get, right? The same way it is for a straight couple. And I have to say that, in 2007, this was easy, right? Because there was nowhere in the United States where same-sex marriage was legal, right? And therefore you called it a commitment ceremony, and you didn't have to worry about licenses, and you didn't have to worry about how would this be dissolved, should that be the case, et cetera, et cetera. It became much more complicated. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm not happy that gays and lesbians, and it's amazing to me that it's only 5 years that, right? I mean, it seems like to me at least, it seems like forever that we've had, same-sex marriage as a basic human right. But it's really only been 5. I mean, it's been longer in Maryland, and it was longer in Connecticut where I lived at the time. But it's really amazing how far we've traveled in just 5 years. So I have not personally officiated a same-sex marriage. I would do so if I were asked, but it would have to be, 2 Jewish men or 2 Jewish women, because I can't officiate at an intermarriage. But I would I would certainly do so. And you know, some of these things, I mean, so since then we've created liturgy for same-sex marriages. We've created even divorce liturgies for same-sex marriages. You know, and there are, you know, really many, many gay and lesbian rabbis, cantors, educators, synagogue presidents, professors, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part. I'll stop here, and if there are questions on that specific part, have at it. Alan, you're you're not muted, but I can't hear you. Oh, now you try it again. No, your microphone's not working. Still can't hear you.
So while he's working on that, Rabbi.
All right, maybe you could type it in the chat box.
There you go.
Yeah, Alan, Mike.
Yeah. So, but while he's working on that, I mean, to me, the importance of the question is not the question itself, but the clash between what the rabbis said and where we think we are or want to be, and how we should be dealing with that. And it's a really tough, complicated thing, and I know that. But if you are flabbergasted to say how short a period of time it has been, how it's almost unthinkable where we were so shortly ago, then you have some fairly strong views. And why let rabbinic history guide you on shaping the views? It's one thing to read them and understand them and consider them, but to take them as, where push comes to shove, to take them as more than history, which might have been valid in their period. It blocks you as a rabbi, us as a congregation and as Jews, from doing what and living what we believe is the ethical, moral, conscionable, logical thing. At some point, you holler uncle. There are a couple of places where, you know, you could point and say, we've never stoned our children when they were bad. Somebody back then hollered uncle, and we didn't fulfill that which was written in the Torah, let alone that the rabbis decided. And then there's oodles of examples where we have digressed from what the rabbis have originally come to with, we did it because we knew what we needed, wanted, believed, and it didn't coincide with the teachings. So I'm just surprised that, I mean, where it would really matter, it would seem to be a tough sell to carve out our actions in the rubric of teachings that we don't buy as relevant to today.
Right. Well, all right. So let me say a couple things. I don't think I've said anything that disagrees with what you just said. I mean, I specifically said that we have the ability to essentially repeal rabbinic legislation when we think it's necessary to do so. I said that explicitly. The question really is not where we disagree with rabbinic legislation, but where we disagree with biblical legislation.
Right.
Right. And here I think, all right, so let me give you an example, and I don't want to get, again, I don't want to get bogged down. Okay, I'm happy to have this discussion at greater length afterwards, right? But so in the article that I published in the Washington Jewish Week, I said in there, for the first time in my 27 years as a conservative rabbi, I've been a rabbi for 34, but I've only been a conservative rabbi for 27 of them. I authorized violation, essentially, of a law committee ruling, right? And without going into too much detail, I mean, I did it because it was necessary, right? But one of the things that was necessary for me in my own conscience to be able to say, we're going to do this, is that I not believe we're violating a biblical commandment. Okay, and the possible, so we've long since held that electricity is not fire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but we have not repealed the ban on writing on Shabbat. Okay, and we don't allow it. Now, we are not, I mean, if I see somebody writing in the shul on Shabbat, if I can ask them to stop without embarrassing them, I will. If it's going to embarrass them, I'll look the other way, but it doesn't mean I think it's okay, right? It's just a question of picking your battles, right? So what is the issue that would make this a problem? The issue is typing, right? You have to type in a URL to get to Zoom. If we needed to protect the room via password, you would have to type in a password. I mean, there's also the issue of Shema Yitaken, which means, you shouldn't do things that might cause you to have to fix them, right? Even if the thing is fine, but it breaks a lot, right? Well, computers break a lot, right? And what are we going to do on Yom Kippur if the Zoom goes down? Right? We're going to fix it, right? We're going to fix it. That would not be a problem if we weren't using it in the first place, right? If I thought that typing into a computer was halakhically writing, I would be between a rock and a hard place. Okay? I do not believe that it's halakhically writing, because the definition of writing is two letters that cannot be erased. And so I believe it's not writing. Okay, when I say I do not know what I would do if I thought it was writing, what I mean by that is I do not know what I would do. Okay, I do not know what I would do, because the necessity would still be there, right? And so I don't think about it, because it's not necessary for me to think about it, because I don't believe that it is a biblical violation. Okay, I do not believe that I have the authority to authorize a biblical violation other than to save a life. Okay, now you obviously disagree, and you're entitled to disagree.
Oh, I don't disagree. I mean, I respect your being guided by halakha and by God, certainly being guided by biblical commandment. I mean, I fully understand that and respect it absolutely, totally, and there's nothing to disagree with. I just see it clashing sometimes with modernity.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
And it's at those moments that you have to think what we have to think what I guess where our priorities lie, maybe, or we have to think about where we come from and how do we deal with what we need in the environment in which we came from.
Right,
I mean,
I mean, you
slightly
also
different.
have to think about what are the consequences. Okay, I mean, I'll give you an example of an opinion that I hold, which is now wildly unpopular among many of my colleagues and marks me as a Neanderthal. Okay, is that for complicated reasons, it is universally believed that according to the Bible, only men can be witnesses. Okay. And when the conservative movement said women can be witnesses, it was a conscious takana. It was an amendment. The Bible says this, we disagree. I don't think we have the power to do that. Okay, so how do I resolve it? If I am the officiant at a wedding, I will insist that the two witnesses be male. Okay, if I am doing a conversion, I will insist that the two other rabbis or two lay people, if it's not rabbis, will be men. Okay, now, if a female colleague asks me to be a witness for her converts, I will do it because that's on her. But when it's on me, I insist on male witnesses. Okay, because I think that the stakes are very high on one end and very low on the other end, right? The stakes are high in the sense that if I use witnesses who are invalid witnesses, the conversion is not a valid conversion, right? On the other hand, and again, it's easy as a man for me to say that the stakes are relatively low, telling a female colleague she can't be a witness. I get that, right? And I pointed to that 3 weeks ago when I said, it was 25 men who decided that women could be rabbis, right? And then it was 25 straight men and women who decided that gays could be rabbis, right? And I understand that, but it's a question of what are the stakes, right? And I think the stakes on one hand are quite high, and the stakes on the other hand are fairly low. So that's where I stand. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about.
Right. Can I
Yeah, Alan,
get
please.
back to where I was before? And
Yeah.
thank you for telling me about my microphone. Just so I understand that the ceremony for gays is not the same as the typical Jewish matrimonial ceremony. How are those things rendered asunder? I mean, of course, in the civil law, our divorce laws now include same-sex marriage.
Right.
How are they handled from a Jewish perspective?
Well, I mean, it's evolving. Okay, it's evolving, and I have to say that since it's not an area that I've ever had to deal with, I haven't really delved into it.
Right.
Right. And so for example, I honestly don't know. All right. And like for example, we have a rule in the conservative movement that gittin, right, gets, Jewish divorce,
Right.
are a very complicated area of Jewish law. Okay, and the local rabbi does not deal with it. Okay, you have to be a certified, what's known as a Mesader Gittin. Okay, there are only a handful of conservative rabbis who are certified Mesadre Gittin, and if somebody, whether from our congregation or just a Jew, who's calling me because I'm the nearest rabbi or the nicest rabbi, says, we need a get. I can direct them to the nearest Masada Get, and I can help them with the paperwork, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I cannot write a get. I don't know how. And if it's not done properly, it's invalid, right? And since 99% of the time when somebody comes to me for a get, it's because they're planning on getting remarried, right? And so if I do it and I make a mistake, what happens? They're an adulterer, right? Because they're still married.
Or they're a bigamist.
They're either a bigamist or an adulterer. A
Oh,
woman,
you take your choice, yeah.
well, no. If you're a woman, you're an adulterer. If you're a man, you're a bigamist. Okay, because men can have more than one wife in halakha, but women cannot have more than one husband.
You're right, thank you.
Okay. I don't. To tell you the truth, I honestly don't know whether I can handle a same-sex divorce on my own or I have to refer that up the chain. I honestly don't know because I've never had to deal with it.
Right.
It's a great question, and now that you've asked me the question, I'm going to find the time and figure out the answer. But I honestly don't know right now.
Rabbi, just as an aside, do you feel it a little weird that you would have no problem performing a commitment ceremony between two gays, which is not kiddushin, and therefore it's okay to do, but you couldn't do that if they were interfaith, even though it's not kiddushin?
Right.
How many disconnects do we have?
Right. No, I have to say that undermined the argument. It definitely undermined it. Right. Prior to 2007, I could simply say it's not kiddushin, and my role as a rabbi is to effectuate kiddushin. Right. So I get that. I mean, I would have to say that, my role as a rabbi is to officiated Jewish ceremonies for Jews, right? And it's a less clean-cut argument, right? I mean, now if I had my druthers, we would do things in the United States the way they do it in most countries in Europe. That is to say that all government recognized marriages are done at City Hall or the courthouse, right? And the clergy do whatever they want and they decline to do whatever they don't want, okay? Because it gets tied up into, questions of rights which are totally irrelevant, right? I mean, and I've had interfaith couples get really mad at me and say, who are you to tell us we can't get married? I'm not telling you can't get married. I'm not telling you can't get married. I'm telling you I can't be the officiant. It's not you, it's me, right? But because I carry a dual role, right, as the representative of Judaism and the representative of the state, it gets confused. I would prefer a clean division between those two, okay? But that's just,
Wow.
it's just not the way we do things here. In my opinion, it is the way we should do things. Okay, I'm going to run through quickly. I mean, I'm assuming you're interested in questions of gender identity and transgender and all that stuff. Yes? All right. What was interesting to me is that the law committee actually dealt with transgender in 2003 before they dealt with before they passed teshuva vote validating homosexuality. Okay, but the 2003 responsum is basically null and void because it's been superseded in 2017. Right. But the one thing that's really interesting, where it's like relevantly different, is that in 2003, the law committee said if you have a heterosexual Jewish marriage and then one partner changes gender, the marriage is dissolved. There is no need for a get, the marriage is dissolved. Okay. And in 2017, we don't hold that way anymore. Okay. So I'll try and run through this really, really quickly. Okay. So the highlight, and this was this responsum was written by there are only, to my knowledge, a handful of conservative rabbis who are also MDs. And this was written by Rabbi Dr. Leonard Sharzer, who's basically a professional medical ethicist at JTS. He's a physician and a second career rabbi. So he says that the person is halachically the gender with which they identify, no matter their genitalia or whether or not they have undergone or plan to undergo surgery, right? Now, this is very different than what was passed in 2003. In other words, in 2003, we said, if you undergo what was then known as gender reassignment surgery, which is today more, I mean, let's say that the trans community prefers it to be called gender confirmation surgery, right? Because they would say, look, I may have the body of a woman, but I am a man and have always been a man, or vice versa, right? So in 2003, we said that, yes, gender change is real after surgery, okay? Now, and I have to say that this is not a given. I mean, the position of the Catholic Church, for example, is ain't no such thing, right? If you were born a man, you are a man. If you were born a woman, you are a woman. Whereas even in Orthodoxy, I mean, it depends because Orthodoxy is a broad spectrum. But there are respected Orthodox rabbis, medical ethicists who say, yes, people do change gender. Okay. But in 2003, basically, yes, you had to undergo surgery in order to be recognized as the gender with which you identify. But today, the law committee says you are the gender with which you identify, no matter what your genitalia are or whether you've undergone or plan to undergo surgery. And whereas in 2003, we assumed that gender change or gender reorientation ended the marriage, today we know that that's not always the case, right? I mean, we know it's not always the case. Also, of course, in 2003, we didn't accept same-sex marriage. Right, so if you had a man married to a woman and the man became a woman, it's now a same-sex marriage, which we don't recognize. Right now we do. Right, so in other words, if there is a gender reorientation or gender confirmation or whatever you want to call it, if the couple wants to stay married, they may stay married. Okay, if they don't want to stay married, and this is, to me, this is very interesting, although it's consistent. You have to get divorced in the same way that you got married. Okay, that is to say, a Jewish man and a Jewish woman marry under a chuppah. The Jewish man becomes a woman. Right? Normally, a woman does not give a get to another woman. Right, but because they were married as a heterosexual couple, they must dissolve the marriage as a heterosexual couple.
Yeah.
Whereas if they got married as a same-sex couple and became a heterosexual couple, they still dissolve the marriage as a same-sex couple. Okay, that but if the person who was the husband refuses to give his wife a get, then the high Beit Din of the conservative movement can annul the marriage. Okay, and this is another thing. We do have marriage annulment, but again, it's not something that the local rabbi can handle. Okay, only called the joint Beit Din, only the joint Beit Din, which sits in the august marble chambers of JTS, can annul a marriage. Okay. I was asked recently, and I said at the time, I don't know, because I've never been asked, but what the law committee says is, if somebody wants to hold a ritual to mark their change of gender, that's fine. It's allowed, it's encouraged, but it's not required, okay? Because it is celebratory and not performative, okay? By which I mean, like what's the difference between a bar mitzvah and a wedding, right? A bar mitzvah is celebratory, right? You don't change from child to adult by virtue of the bar mitzvah. It marks the change from child to adult. It does not perform the change, right? Whereas a wedding or a conversion are performative, right? You become married by virtue of the wedding. You become Jewish by virtue of the conversion. You do not become a different gender by virtue of the ceremony, right? In fact, if you're a trans person, you would say, I never became the gender at all. I always was. I've just started living the way I always really was. Okay. So that's really it. And I have to say, speaking personally, I mean, it's something that I don't understand, okay? But I don't have to understand it, right? People, and I actually I have a cousin who I've never met, because he is the son of my second cousin. All right, so my second cousin, we're of the same age and we grew up together, but she lives in California. I haven't seen her in years, but her daughter Martha became her son Jude. So I do have a trans cousin, like I say, who I've never met, but of whom I know, and I follow what he does. And I don't have to understand it, but it's clear that this is a reality for certain people. And if you speak to trans people, or if you've seen the series Transparent, which I thought was really, really good, people say, I always knew that I was a woman, even though I was, raised as a man and had the body of a man. I'm just confirming what I already was. And again, you may think it's weird, but very often, people who convert to Judaism say, I was always Jewish, right? I was a Jew who somehow I was a Jew who somehow was born into a non-Jewish family. And I don't really feel I'm becoming Jewish. I'm confirming who I always was. And I think we just have to live with that and accept it and not judge it. So that's it. Again, questions, comments, whatever.
Rabbi? Yeah, I'm just curious. So if someone has led most of their life, say as a woman, and then they get recognized, they come out or whatever as a man, and they're Jewish, would they then observe all the mitzvot for a man at that point?
Right. Now, one of the things that Rabbi Sharzer says is that we don't have those differences in Judaism, in conservative Judaism, right? So he says, so I'm not going to deal with questions like, for example, and I don't belittle it, right? But if you're an Orthodox rabbi who accepts the reality of transgenderism, what side of the mechitza do they sit on, right? Do they put on tefillin, right? Et cetera, right? We don't have to worry about that. We don't have a mechitza, and in theory, both men and women put on tefillin. I mean, we certainly know that both men and women are allowed to put on tefillin, but in theory, both men and women are obligated to put on tefillin. All right, so now that gets back to a whole other question, which I'm not going to deal with, but so we don't really have to deal with that, right? I mean, the only area where we really have to deal with that is in essentially creation or dissolution of marriage, right? That's the one area in conservative Judaism where we still recognize distinct gender roles. Right, and so that's the one area where it becomes relevant, and I think we've thread the needle, which is to say you are halachically the gender with which you identify, but you can't sort of retroactively kind of change the circumstances under which you got married, right? So that but as tachlis, right? A man and a trans woman who has not undergone surgery, right? In other words, a person assigned male gender at birth who lives as a woman, right? Whether they have or even plan to undergo gender confirmation ceremony, I can marry them as a man and a woman. Right? You are halachically a woman, even, in other words, you're halachically a woman even if you have a penis, if you identify as a woman, right? It gets complicated, and that's where, like I say, I mean, I'm kind of a prude, and some of this stuff, I get it's icky for me, but it's a reality. Yeah, Alan.
Rabbi, you watch Billions. What about Taylor Mason?
Right. So it does also recognize that there is a category of people who consider themselves non-binary or non.
Right.
A lot of them.
Right.
Then what?
Right. I mean, it does. There is such a category. I don't recall. I'd have to go back. Because again, it's so far from my reality, right? But I don't know what non-binary or non-gendered people do about marriage and romance. I just don't know. So I don't know. I don't know. And I like I say, I don't recall what Rabbi Sharja says there. I'll have to go back and look at it. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Good. Well, Lila Tov, thank you very much. I know that,
Thank you.
I know that we've gone through this at lightning speed, but
Appreciate it.
that's what we have. All right. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you, Rabbi.
Lila Tov. Lila Tov.
Lila Tov, thank you.
Thank you.